Thanks, Adrian, and thank you, Anne, also for inviting me to talk at this. Mania is a word that you don't find in a lot of dictionaries, but it's a term that was first used by Lawrence Durrell, who spent much of his childhood living on Cyprus Island and wrote books such as My Family and Other Islands and Plato's Cave, which are known to all of you. Mania is a condition that people have, which is something that makes them drawn and attracted to islands, fascinated and not able to keep away from islands. I myself am a self-confessed Isle-maniac. And growing up in Galway, I always enjoyed visiting the Aran Islands, where very often, when it was lashing rain in the city of Galway, you'd go across on the Niamh Éine. At the time, you'd have to get onto a currach to be brought in, and the skies would be blue, the sun would be shining, and it was heaven, just walking around those islands. Later on in my 20s, I spent a lot of time traveling and wandering with a little backpack around the Greek islands, and to me, that was like Connemara at sunshine. And then later on, now I have this relationship with Sherkin Island. Most of the students who work with me are very familiar with this map, which is a blank map of Sherkin. It's something that I give to all students when they come in and work in the programme, because I think it's fascinating looking at maps and thinking about what do you put on a map, and the amazing things that people have come up with. One of them in particular, you know, apart from the usual things of rocks and flowers and places that people have drawn and made sculpture on the island, are things like, one student told me that she walked all of the roads of Sherkin one day and marked on a map the only 2 pieces of litter she found on the island. Writers and artists have always been drawn to islands. There's lots of people that we can look at. George Orwell wrote 1984 while living on the island of Jura. We had Robert Louis Stevenson who wrote Treasure Island, talks about as a child being fascinated with inventing islands and doing drawings of imaginary islands and plotting the rivers and the landscape on the island. Lucy Lippard, who came to Sherkin and gave a very interesting talk on her topic, on her book, The Lure of the Local, says that, and she's written a lot about the spirit of place and its influences in contemporary art practice. She says space defines landscape. Space combined with memory defines place. And I think that's something that artists and writers come back to that concept. Simon Schama, in his book Landscape and Memory, talks about landscape as being the work of the mind. Its scenery is built up as much from strata of memory as from layers of rock. My background of growing up, we were talking a bit about education earlier on, and I found that very fascinating. But my background of my art education was moving from the west of Ireland to Dublin City, where I felt lonely, isolated. I felt the landscape was grey. I felt the things that had made me interested in art as a child were no longer there. And I found that this was something that affected other young students as well, coming from the country and going to college in a city. We arranged once a year to bring students to a rural environment, to Donegal or to Lettermore and Connemara. And for some students, you could see that this was a moment of astonishment, because they were overwhelmed by the ruggedness, they were overwhelmed by the landscape, they were able to relate and feel part of the land again. And very often, initially people would say, God, it's so overpowering, I can't do any art. But then they would relax, start playing with materials, become involved with the space, and do work that was often a big breakthrough in their practice. So we come back to the thing of why are art colleges in cities, and what does this do to people? My first arrival in Sherkin was, in my late 20s, was also a moment of astonishment. You know, you come to a place you've never been before and you feel you belong. You feel there is a sort of universal memory or spirituality that you can relate to. And to me, I just fell in love with Sherkin. I came for 2 nights, I stayed for 2 weeks. I've been coming back ever since. I think the light in islands is magic. There's a sort of healing that you can't explain. The safety of feeling surrounded by the sea. And I think that it's something that a lot of artists relate to. Sherkin has a history of learning, in that there were a community of learners there, with the Franciscan abbey was in the 15th century was a seat of learning, which was a fantastic thing for a small island community, and it must have been an amazing time to live on Sherkin Island. So as I came to Sherkin first, initially, as I said, I was totally taken with the landscape, and I walked all over it. And when I got back to Dublin, my first thought was, when can I get back there again? But as I got to know the place, I became interested as much in the landscape initially, but then the community. And I found that the people of Sherkin were so welcoming of blow-ins, as they would call it. But I found that there was always warmth, there was always friendliness, I was always made feel welcome, and I think that extended later on when my daughter was born and I brought her and my husband. We've always felt there's a real community feeling in Sherkin. And I feel it's a very, very special place. As I spent time on Sherkin, I became aware of the community hall as the sort of heart of the island and a hub of meeting people, conversations, and lots of educational pursuits. Liam Chambers, who was the development officer at the time, told me there was funding, and there were all kinds of short courses in Reiki, in alternative medicine, in set dancing, and there was a fantastic range of art classes and great interest in art. The classes were run by Majella O'Neill Collins, and they started with children's classes and then went to adults. But Liam explained to me that while the government funding was there for short courses, they often gave people a taste for something. Then the course was gone, and they were left there, hanging there in their island without any more, any more material to engage with. So Liam and I talked about the possibility of DIT, who were my employers at the time in Dublin. I was working on the fine art degree programme there at the time, getting involved in a partnership and maybe, doing something with distance education or becoming involved with the island in some way. So we met with John O'Connor, who was the recently appointed head of School of Art, Design and Printing at the time, and he was very interested. He had relationships with the Blasket Islands, and he was very interested in the concept. So we, in 1998, organised a meeting in West Cork with 2 groups of people, one from DIT and one from Sherkin Island Development Society. And we started to think, could we do this? We had done lots of research before. We found that in Australia and Canada, where distance education is a big thing, they didn't have any success with distance education in undergraduate courses in art because it's hands-on. So we felt something that was totally distance-based wouldn't work. So we looked everywhere for a model and found there wasn't anything. So we said, right, we'll create something. We'll look at different ways of learning, we'll look at different ways of doing it. The community were very concerned that we looked at the needs of the community. This wasn't for school leavers, this was for people that were in the area, that had missed out on a chance of college and that wanted to pursue an art education, but for whom moving to a city was not possible. So we decided we didn't want to, we had lots of discussion. It was a fantastic 3 days, I think, in Ballinadee in West Cork. Everybody was very enthusiastic and excited, and we decided, right, we're going for it, we're going to plan it. We'll start in 2 years' time with a pilot programme. Let's work towards a degree. Let's look at things, ways that learning could happen. There was no question of using the traditional model of the lecturer here handing the information to the student. We wanted to look at new ways of learning, at innovation. It was possible because the community hall was there. It was possible because there was already video conferencing equipment. At the time, there was an ISDN line, which meant we could have access to the internet, which was in 1998 was a big deal to be able to do that. And we worked very closely with the Learning and Teaching Centre in DIT at new ways of learning and new ways of, people learning to work together. So, sorry about this, I'm a bit nervous. We decided again that it would never be possible to replicate the traditional art college situation on an island with a community hall. But we felt, okay, we're never going to have state-of-the-art sculpture workshops or print workshops, but we have a lot that cities haven't got to offer people that are interested in art. So let's try and really do something amazing with what we have. And I think that while the Dublin students have their workshops, the Sherkin Island students have got the absolutely amazing landscape all around them, which they have engaged with, not just in terms of, you would think initially of drawing and painting and photography, but they've done some really innovative contemporary art, working in the environment, working on the beaches, working on the hills, and always being very eco-friendly in their approach. But there has been some amazing work that couldn't have been created anywhere else. Okay. As I said, we were looking at new learning methodologies, innovative ways of learning. We constantly sought the advice and help of experts in the field, such as Barry Jackson from Middlesex, who's done lots of work on peer evaluation and assessment. We had lots of workshops on the island with staff and students working together. The pilot programme commenced in 2000 and lasted for 3 years. West Cork Arts Centre also become involved in this partnership at this stage. Then there was a gap. There were all kinds of problems, both within, funding issues within DIT, within the community, and it was a battle to get the degree validated and to get the degree started again, which happened in 2008, when 14 students from the original pilot commenced. So, sorry, I skipped a slide there. Doesn't matter. It was just about the fact that normally people from the periphery have to go to the centre, and we thought the centre is now going to come to the periphery. We found when we started, the white paper in adult education came out, and we were already dealing with the concepts that they suggested: learning in the learner's community, community involvement, student-centred learning, and improved access for mature students. Looking at ways of learning, we find that very often, as in the video earlier on, lots of adults have had very bad experiences from education. I know when I started primary school, one of the punishments for a boy who was chatting in class was he'd have to wear one of the girls' Irish dancing costumes. You can't imagine, but I mean, we accepted this as normal punishment. So one of the things we felt was we want to learn from one another. Art is something that is generally lifelong learning. You never know it all. And this is a quote that I use very often. It's a very well-known Picasso quote. Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once he grows up. So we felt we want to keep it fun. We want to try and develop people's creativity, encourage play in art, playing with materials, playing with meaning, and empowering people to learn together. So we constantly look at new methodologies, such as instead of people submitting their work to a lecture, they put them up on a blog, which, so people can look at one another's work and learn from one another. We also use informal things such as social networking. There's a Facebook page where people can put up their images and talk and engage in that way and share ideas and learning. Okay, so although this course was initially set up as a prototype, the idea was to set it up as a way, as a model that could be transferred so that people in other isolated communities, be they geographically or socially isolated, would be able to involve themselves in education. But the programme can never be duplicated anywhere else, because there's so much of Sherkin that has been involved. The unique and wonderful landscape continues to be an inspiration and an integral part of what makes the programme so successful. But also, what really makes it very unique is the community having ownership of the programme. And I think that's really, really important. All staff and students have been made welcome. There's great music sessions in the pub. There's a lot going on. And this was after a long, long battle. These were students who started in 2000, and that's our first graduates this time last year, which was truly, after a long, long battle, a true moment of astonishment. And on Monday, we're going to have the last lot from that pilot programme. So, thank you.